In 2015, a funeral was held in Belgrade for George Vujnovich, an American war hero of Serbian ancestry. His daughter and granddaughter traveled from the United States to pay their last respects. Voinovich was an operative for the Office of Strategic Services, the O.S.S., which was America's secret intelligence service founded during the Second World War. The agency, a forerunner to the CIA, led secret operations against the Axis forces during the war. Voinovich was involved in one such mission, the daring operation to save several hundred U.S. airmen who had been shot down over Serbia. The mission was codenamed Halyard. His war adventures resemble something out of an action movie. The story will now be told by some of the American and Serbian participants in the Halyard mission, as well as by leading U.S. experts on World War II air combat and secret operations.
In 1941, when he was a student here in Belgrade, but he was originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And of course, 1941 was when the Germans attacked Yugoslavia, so they had to leave. And my father ended up in the U.S. Army as an officer, and later in the O.S.S. during World War II.
We spoke with George Vujnovich in May 2009 in New York, where he lived most of his life. Memories of the war in Serbia were still very fresh in his mind.
My name is George Vujnovich, and I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on May 31st, 1915, almost 94 years ago. My family were Serbian from Lika, and they immigrated to the States in 1912, 1914. And at Ambridge, Pennsylvania, I was awarded a scholarship to go to Serbia by the Serb National Federation. So they thought it would be a good idea to send a group over to Yugoslavia and there to learn the language, customs, and come back to the States and be a bridge between those that were in America and those who were in Serbia. It was a wonderful and noble idea, but the war came along in 1941.
Germany attacked Yugoslavia in April 1941. After only 2 weeks, the Balkan monarchy surrendered.
I was studying medicine, and I met a young lady there. She was a professor of the English language at the schools. When the Germans came in, they took over Belgrade and, of course, all of Serbia. And with my girlfriend and her family, her brother evacuated to Herzegovina. And we were down there. The Italians came up from the south. They had been in Albania. I told my girlfriend, we can get married, and I may be faithful to you for 3, 4, maybe 5 years. But people change, and I may find somebody, you may find somebody. So it's up to you to decide whether we should get married or not. So we decided not to get married. I left for Belgrade with the Americans who had evacuated Belgrade. They had all come down to Herzegovina, and in a convoy we went up to through Dubrovnik, Sarajevo.
In order to return to Belgrade, Voinovich had to cross through the independent state of Croatia, a satellite of Nazi Germany, which resulted from the breakup of Yugoslavia after the German occupation. This newly formed state was led by Ante Pavlich and the ultra-nationalist Ustashi movement, which advocated the policies aimed against the Jewish, Serbian, and Roma populations there.
In Sarajevo, I had a very unpleasant experience. When we came into Sarajevo, and we came in there at night, and we went to the hotel, and of course over there, they immediately asked us for identification or passports. I reached in my pocket. I couldn't find my passport. And there was two Ustashis there. Immediately they accused me of being a spy because of my accent. And despite the fact that the consul and Ray Brock, who was a correspondent for the New York Times, insisted that I was an American, they said they would take me and put me in jail. Finally, they prevailed, and the Ustashis let me stay overnight, but in the morning, if I didn't produce my passport, they were going to take me and put me in jail. And possibly that would be the end of me. But fortunately, at 7 o'clock in the morning, when our chauffeur came up to wake me up, he said, I looked in the back of the car as I was cleaning, and there was your passport on the floor. We continued on to Belgrade.
German authorities in Belgrade carried out oppressive measures as well. For example, Serbian citizens were forbidden to marry citizens of foreign countries.
Next morning at 6 o'clock, when the curfew was up and people were walking around the streets, my bride-to-be, or my wife-to-be, we ran up to the church with the two witnesses, and there we were married with nobody in the church. On Thursday, we went on a boat which went up to the Danube to Hungary. After 2 days, it got there, and we stayed there for about two and a half months. But we couldn't go any further. The Germans wouldn't allow us to go west or south through Serbia or through Yugoslavia or through Germany.
At that time, Nazi Germany is in complete control of Central Europe. George Vujnovich and his wife face a serious dilemma. Where do they go next in order to avoid Nazi repression? They see a possible solution to proceeding to the Middle East by way of neutral Turkey. The Middle East was controlled by Allied forces at the time and would provide them a safe haven until they figured a way back to the United States.
One day when I was changing money with a moneylender, he told me, why don't you leave? I said, well, I can't get out. I can't go here, there. He said, well, you can take a plane to Bulgaria. Bulgaria is not at war. We went out to the airport, got on a plane, and she sat in front between two people, and I sat in the back near the door. This was a Lockheed Lodestar, which had 4 rows of 3 seats. I had 12 passengers. We took off, and my wife became very sick because of the shaking of the plane. And I went forward to see what was happening to her, and this woman next to her was holding a cloth to her door. I compressed her head, saying she's going to be all right. And I asked my wife, are you feeling all right? She said, no, I feel terrible. I said, why? This is only a flight of about 40 minutes. We'll be there in a few minutes. She said, you don't know the half of it. The woman sitting next to me is Magda Goebbels, the wife of Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda chief of Germany. And she's traveling to Yugoslavia. I went out, and there was an officer there. Passports, please. I gave him my passport. And I stood there waiting for my wife. She was among the last to come out. And since she was very weak, Mrs. Goebbels had her by her left arm, and This officer says, "Passports, please." And Mrs. Gables yelled at him, "What do you want a passport for her? That's the wife of that man who's standing next to you. Come here and help her out." They never looked at her documents. When we got to Bulgaria, we took a train to the border. Germans were in charge. They gave us our passports, and they said, about 10 miles from here is the border. But all the bridges are down. There's no railroads, no roads. They're all blowing up. And the only way you can go through is through a minefield. We took our bags, carried them, and walked through that shadow of death, or whatever you call it, past those mines on both sides, and finally got over to Turkey. And we were then free because Turkey was not at war.
Arriving in Turkey was just the beginning of the adventure as the newly married couple made their way to the Middle East. In Jerusalem, they found work writing in the Serbian language for Allied news agencies. A few months later, they left for Cairo. On June 28th, St. Vitus Day in the Orthodox tradition, they met 3 American officers attending a religious ceremony.
The older man was a gray-haired man. His name was George Krager. He was head of Pan American Orient Airlines. And they were flying supplies from Miami through South America, across Africa, landed in Chongqing, China, where they brought supplies for Chiang Kai-shek's forces or whatever Americans there were of them.
George Krager, of Slovenian descent, flew as a volunteer for the Royal Serbian Air Force during World War I and emigrated to the United States after the war. During their first meeting in Cairo, he offered Voinovich a job with Pan American on the spot. But the offer came with one condition.
You must get a visa to go south through Khartoum and to cross all of Africa over to get to the West Coast, which is about 6 or 7 countries. And you get that at the Sudan Agency, which was run by the British. My wife and I went down, and we came to this Sudan Agency. There was a crowd of about 200 people in front of it, some of them waving money in the air. They wanted to get into the embassy or to the Sudan Agency to get a visa. I saw one of the men there. I said, "I'd like to see His Majesty's consul in there." He says, "What for?" I says, "I can't tell you. It's confidential." He said, "Well, just a minute." He calls his captain over. His captain asked me the same question. I gave him the same answers. So he said, "Okay, you can go in." When we got inside, the consul greeted me. The name of Philip Reed, I remember very distinctly. And he said, "What can I do for you, Mr. Voinovich?" I said, "I'd like to get a visa for all these countries across Africa and get into Accra, where the American Air Force Base was. It's now called Ghana. At that time, it was called the Gold Coast." And he said, "What for?" I said, "I can't tell you, but I'm with the intelligence, and I have to go on a job down there, but I can't tell you what it's about." He said, "Okay." He sent my passport. I came out 5 minutes later, and as my wife went around the corner, she was crying when she saw me coming. She said, "They turned you down." I said, No, I got it." She said, "How do you do that?" And I said, "It's confidential."
Thanks to his resourcefulness, Voinovich began working for Pan American, which soon became part of the United States Army. All employees were incorporated into the military rank structure, resulting in Voinovich receiving his military rank. Becoming an officer in the U.S. Army was his point of entry into the Secret Service. However, he hadn't even known it existed at the time.
O.S.S. refers, of course, to the Office of Strategic Services. It was our first true intelligence service and the forerunner of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Professor Kirk Ford teaches history at Mississippi College and is one of the leading experts on American secret operations during World War II.
O.S.S. was designed to do a number of things. One, it had a intelligence function to go into some countries and gather needed intelligence to provide for use in shaping operations. It had an operational function. In some instances, you would have teams that would go in that would carry out operations based upon the intelligence they had received. And it also had what might be called a small arms function with the operational groups, some of which operated in the islands off the coast of Yugoslavia. And some see in that the birth of special operations teams even today.
Two civilians showed up. They said, "We're from the O.S.S. I said, "What's that?" "Office of Strategic Services." I just never heard of it. Well, it's a company, it's a unit that reports directly to the president, and it's our intelligence unit for this war. And we want you to join because you're commanding the Serbian language and people you know over there. 2 days later, I flew up to Washington. They sent us out to what they call the farm, training for that. They told me to be on a certain corner, have a rose in my lapel, but not have any insignia in my coat. Tear out all the insignia you have here, no identification, and have a newspaper under your arm. You'll be contacted by somebody, and they'll take you to a car out to our training area. And they took me to the car. All the blinds were down. I don't know where we went. We finally went out there. We got out there. There was about 30 of us being trained for espionage. We were trained in code work, hand-to-hand combat, small arms fire. I'll never forget Major Fairburn. Major Fairburn was chief of police in Shanghai, China. He was the head of the training of us for hand-to-hand combat. He knew so many dirty tricks. He could approach a man in about 10 seconds, break his arm or break his leg. One of the trainings we had was to go into Baltimore to try to find certain information. And I went down to the Baltimore shipyards to get a job. They took me right away. And that afternoon, when we were coming out, about 4 o'clock when the shift was changing, the man that was keeping time, there's the only man I knew, I says, "Why don't we have a beer at the local parlor?" And we went across the street, and we sat down, had a beer. And we were talking there. He asked me where I was from. "Oh, I'm from Seattle. I was working on a shipping yard up there." I don't know if you know what the negative information is, but let me tell you, it's only natural if I say something wrong that you correct me. You feel superior. So what happened was, I told him we were making one ship a day. One ship a day, and that was the busiest shipbuilding yards in the United States. He said, "What do you mean, ship? We make 5 a day." I said, don't lie to me." He said, yes, we make it." I said, "I bet you a glass of beer." He said, "Okay." He called over the man that keeps the records of how many ships are built. He says, "Tell him, John, how many ships do we build a day?" He says, 5. "What do you want to know for?" He says, "Well, I have a bet with this man." I said, "Okay, you win a beer." But I got my information.
Meanwhile, the Allies had gained greater access to Yugoslavia and other areas in Europe as a result of their successful invasion of Italy. This was one of the more important turning points of the war in Europe. The O.S.S. saw this as an ideal opportunity to begin secret operations in the Balkans.
As the Allies moved up the leg of Italy, so to speak, they began to establish bases in Italy for operations across the Adriatic into the Balkans. Ultimately, what they're going to do is establish an advanced base at Bari Italy. And from there, missions will be infiltrated into Yugoslavia.
Yugoslavia was divided between the Nazis and their satellites, but two resistance movements were operating in the country. Draža Mihailović led the forces that remained loyal to the monarchy, while the partisan movement was led by Josip Broz Tito. In the beginning, they cooperated against the Nazi occupiers, but eventually this cooperation ended, replaced by open conflict, a result of the deep ideological differences between the two movements. A bitter civil war ensued.
As far as the nature of what O.S.S. and SOE were initially doing in Yugoslavia, I think that the early missions that go in there are mainly concerned with trying to find out which of the two resistance elements operating in the country were the most effective, which of the resistance movements were doing the most to harm the Germans, in other words. So I think initially when the missions go in, that's their job. Later on, once that has been decided, the missions then are primarily concerned with getting supplies into areas where it will do the most good for the group selected to be supported.
After his training was complete, Voinovich returned to Washington. From there, he was transferred to Italy, assigned to become a liaison officer to the resistance movement led by General Mihailović.
At that time, Mihailović was on the peak of his popularity, and it was being backed, and that was it.
General Mihailović was recognized and characterized as the leading force behind that. That was before much was known about the partisan movement. The contribution that Mihailović was making or could make, the potential, was blown out of proportion because this was about the only light on a dark continent that there was. And so we wanted to magnify it, make it perhaps much greater than it was. General Mihailović never asked for that. This was something that was done. This was a creation of the media in the West, and it extended even to this country. His picture appeared on Time magazine, and the article, you read the rhetoric that was attached to that article, and it was difficult to imagine that any resistance movement could live up to that. But that was, that was the way he was portrayed at the time.
From an O.S.S. operational base in Brindisi, Italy, George Vujnovich coordinated several secret operations in the Balkans and in other occupied countries of Southeast Europe.
We were sending supplies out of Brindisi to various bases up in northern Italy, and in a couple of cases into Austria, and Yugoslavia, and Greece, and even into Romania. As operations officer, I would train the men, so-called agents we were sending in. Some of them were pretty stupid. They would want to go in with a pack of cigarettes, Camels. Where can you get Camels in occupied Germany or occupied Yugoslavia?
While the intelligence service of the O.S.S. was still in its infancy, the American Air Force in Italy prepared an operation against the German war machine in Southeast Europe.
The decision has been announced. We will destroy oil refineries and synthetic oil plants.
The Germans had to have oil to run their tanks, to run their trucks, to run their vehicles. If you can stop them from moving around on the ground, then you stop the army, and it's a much easier army to defeat. That's why Ploesti, with its large oil refineries, became a critical target.
The oil refineries located near Ploiești, Romania, were the biggest oil fields in Europe. These facilities represented an important strategic target for General Nathan Twining, commander of the 15th Air Force, located in Bari, Italy.
Starting in the summer of 1944, there was a huge campaign to put these oil refineries out of commission.
German fighters, supported by strong anti-aircraft artillery, clashed with the Allied air forces in the sky over the Balkans.
The number of bombers that would be involved sometimes would be 500 or 600 or 700.
onda na Đurđevdan, kad je bilo oko 8 sati, mi ustanemo, američki i engleski avioni pokrili nebo i ne vidi se nebo. Bombarderi, oni teški, ne idu mnogo brzo, ali oni džetlovi, mi zvali džetlovi, to su lovci koji ih štite. Ti da vidiš šta oni rade ispred onih bombardera, kako oblijeće, kogod da je vrabac.
Many Allied airmen don't return from these dangerous missions, or so their families thought after receiving a telegram stating that their sons or husbands were missing in action.
We were hit just after the bombs were released, and 2 engines were severely damaged or put out of action on the left side of the plane. On the way down, I could see farmers and people yelling and pointing at us and dogs barking.
In addition to finding the aircraft that flew these missions, now on display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, we also met with some of the veterans that flew them. They all shared the experience of being shot down over enemy territory and then rescued from behind enemy lines. One of these men is Bob Wilson.
And I simply unbuckled the parachute harness and walked toward the first person. He had heavy wool clothing on, and this was July 15th, and he had turned up moccasins. I noticed that there was a young girl not very far away, and she had a wooden cask, and I thought, I'm gonna get a drink of water. Finally, I'll get some water. So I leaned it back, and it wasn't water, it was rakia, the plum brandy.
Bob Wilson is one of several hundred American airmen who, after abandoning their aircraft over Serbia, were rescued and protected by members of Mihalovich's movement. Yet the American command in Italy had limited knowledge of what was happening in occupied Serbia and classified the airmen as missing.
My wife sees this telegram. She was working at the Yugoslav embassy in Washington, D.C., and she sent me a list of all the people that Mihalovic had said were in his camps. The British were saying that that's a trick. They want, Mihalovic wants Americans to come in there, and they would hold them hostage for guns and supplies and everything, which is not true.
At this time, both Tito's partisans and Mihalovic's monarchists were being supported in Yugoslavia by the Allies.
Churchill had become convinced by people that he said he knew and trusted that to continue to supply both sides just fanned the flames of a civil war, and the only people that profited from that would have been the Germans.
In November 1943, at the Tehran Conference, the leaders of the Soviet Union, United States, and Great Britain met to discuss their war efforts. They decided that the Allies would provide full support exclusively to Tito's forces.
General Mihalovic's movement was almost doomed when they decided that they would not send significant forces into the Balkans. And the reason I say that is because Mihalovic's strategy was to be a force in place at the time the Allies came, so that he could rise up, support them, fight against the occupiers, and not put the innocent civilian population at risk uselessly. But when the Allies decided that they were not going to do that, then Mihalovic's strategy of being a force in waiting didn't fit with their strategy any longer. Tito's more aggressive policy did.
Abandoning Mihalovic, the Allies canceled missions from his headquarters in Serbia, while at the same time, the survival of hundreds of airmen who'd been shot down remained under the responsibility of Mihalovic and the local Serbian population. These locals rescued, supported, and protected the airmen, risking severe reprisals from the Nazis.
Iako ubiješ jednog Nemca, ovdje celo selo, ako za jednog Nemca, ako mu naškodi nešto. Napatili smo se, ja ne znam kako sam živa. I od vojske, i od gladi, i od svega.
And they gave the best of everything they had to the American airmen. There's one story that I remember being given to me by one of the airmen. They complained somewhat about the accommodations they were living in until one morning they get up and they realize that the family that has shared their home with them is spending the night in a goat pen so that they can stay in the home.
By the end of June 1944, more than 250 American airmen found themselves in Serbia. While they were safe and being cared for, the command in Bari was still unaware of their fate.
A group of airmen inside who were being held by the nationalists are going to gain access to a transmitter, and they're going to send a very innovative and ingenious message back to Bari, Italy. TK Oliver, operating under the call sign TKO, sends the message back. And it's couched in terms that only someone in Bari would know. These are airmen because of the things they put in there.
After establishing that the messages were genuine, the American command decided the O.S.S. should send a special rescue team to extract the airmen. The team, known as the Air Crew Rescue Unit, was commanded by George Crayer, an old acquaintance of George Vujnovich, who had recommended him to the O.S.S. Voinovich expected to be sent to Serbia as well, but his superiors had other plans for him.
I was supposed to go, and when Robert Joyce said, "You can't go," I said, if I'm not to go, I reserve the right to pick who I want.
Designation of the team was Aircrew Rescue Unit 1. The code name given to the operation was Halyard. George Muselin is going to be the tactical commander of the mission. He has with him Arthur Jabilian, who's a radio operator, and Michael Ryasich is the third member of the team.
The three O.S.S. operatives landed in Serbia on the night of August 2nd and proceeded to make contact with Mihailovich. They expected to find approximately 50 airmen.
We didn't find 50, we found 250. And they were waiting for us very anxiously. Of course, some of them in bad shape. Again, many wounded.
The mission was planned by air because that was the only way you could get Mihailovich's headquarters. 15th Air Force. We gave them guidance on where to cross the coast, where it was safe to cross the coast, and then go into the interior.
The Halyard team, after consulting with members of Mihailovich's resistance movement, decided there was only one way to rescue the airmen from the hilly Serbian countryside. They had to build an airstrip just outside the village of Pranjani. This airstrip had to be suitable for the landing of a heavy C-47 Dakota transport.
We had a system, it was a British system, of you pointed north and you said 50 paces, 100 paces, 200 paces, and you told them what was up there, and then you went at 15 degrees, and then 30 degrees, and 45 degrees. And if you gave them all that, they could draw a map. And that's how they got, we planned the airfields.
Serbs and Americans worked together to build the airstrip. They had to work at night to hide from German reconnaissance.
To je bilo veliki poduhvat, zato što je mjesec dana je rađeno na tom aerodromu. Vukli su kamen i pesak iz reka volovima. Nije bilo onda kamiona. Volovima su vukli. I tako da su to visoravan navukli kamen da ne bi bila zemlja, da bude tvrda podloga.
That was a very risky operation, by the way, because they were always fearful that with the activity around Pranjani, that area, they were going to attract the attention of the Germans. That, fortunately, did not occur. So Jibilian is going to be able to notify Bari that the landing strip is ready, and Bari will send in planes on the night of August 9th and 10th. And on that night, also, Captain Nick Lalich is going to come in as another member of the team to assist.
George Musselin and Nick Lalich were two OSS commandos of Serbian ancestry who participated in Operation Halyard. As commander of the rescue team, Musselin was responsible for building the airstrip and preparing for the arrival of the rescue aircraft.
Musselin was a very outspoken man. He could go up to a colonel or general and tell him, what kind of bullshit is this? And he would speak his mind wherever he got into. And he didn't care for orders. He wanted to get his job done. And he was very much gung-ho for Mihailovich.
On one of the earlier evacuations that took place, Mussolini had allowed a group of representatives from General Mihailovich's staff to go back to Italy. The British found out about that and strenuously objected to it. Colonel Krager was ultimately required to withdraw George Mussolini for that reason, to come back to explain why he had done what he did. And at that point, Nick Lalich, who had come in earlier, will assume command of the Halyard mission.
Lalich assumed command after Musselin departed and saw the mission through until completion in December 1944.
Nick Lalich was a strapping 6'2" American all-star basketball player. He didn't know, he knew a smattering of Serbian, but he was so thrilled to be going over there. And he saluted me and he said, I always wanted to go over there. Now I'm going to have a chance to go over.
The mission on the first night resulted in over 230 Allied airmen being extricated from Pranjani. Mihailovich and the remaining airmen stayed in the region until September 1944, awaiting subsequent rescue flights. However, it was at this time that partisan forces entered Serbia from the west, while the Red Army attacked from Bulgaria in the east. At the same time, German Army Group E was passing through Serbia during its retreat from Greece in the south. This forced Mihailovich to retreat to northwest Serbia and eventually move into Bosnia.
Halyard remains in the country until December the 27th. There are going to be other airmen that they know about are still in the country. And so Halyard remains. The effort was being made and pressure was being applied to Lalich to come out. And he kept delaying that. At one point, he was told, you are going to have to explain why you have disobeyed orders to withdraw. Well, the reason, he was sent in there to get the airmen out, and there were still airmen there. And so as far as he was concerned, his mission was not complete. And Halyard members note this as well. They would sit around the campfires with Mihailovich's forces at night, and they would hear planes flying in, dropping supplies to the partisans. Nothing was coming in to the nationalist forces who were protecting the airmen. Nothing came in until, I think, Christmas Day. Coming out of Bari, George Vujnovich undertook, primarily on his own authority, to send in supplies to the Halyard team and to the airmen and to the forces that were guarding them. Nick Lalich sent a message back to Bari and said, I now believe in Santa Claus.
I never met Mihailovich. I had 2 letters from him. They're in Serbian. He wrote that in his own beautiful handwriting. He wrote very beautifully. He sent me that dagger you saw there. The last mission that Nick Lalich had was near Voinovich. Nick Lalich had to go from Bosnia to Voinovich.
In my opinion, Halyard is one of the more outstanding operations of any type during the war. Logistically, it was something of a feat to do what had to be done. There is this ongoing debate about how many airmen were evacuated. I think Nick Lalich, in his report that he filed when he got back to Bari, indicated that there were 343 American airmen evacuated by way of Halyard. A number of other Allied personnel, I think the total came to 417. I think there are some who would say the number was greater than that, but that's what he filed in his report. My view of that has always been that the numbers are not the most significant thing about Halyard. It was sent in to get out as many American airmen as it could, and I think it did that.
Words fail me, and if I get emotional, you'll have to excuse me, because they took care of our boys. I don't think I could have done as good a job. I really don't. They fed our boys. They gave them their beds. They slept on the floor. They slept outside so our boys could sleep inside. They stood back and watched our boys eat when they didn't have enough to eat themselves.
I think it was very successful. Well done, well executed. We had no losses. We saved every man. It was a wonderful operation. And what I can't understand is why they didn't put this on better headlines throughout the United States, and why they didn't report all those names. That's the thing that I can't understand. Other than that, it was a perfect operation.
66 years after the end of the Second World War, O.S.S. veteran George Vujnovich was awarded the Bronze Star Medal, recognizing his meritorious achievements. He was the last remaining member of the mission that rescued several hundred Allied airmen from behind enemy lines in Serbia. In 2015, Voinovich's urn made one final trip from the United States to his final resting place in Belgrade, Serbia. The same year, General Mihailovich was rehabilitated